All right, good morning. My name is Eddie Oldfield. I'm a senior lead with projects for Quest Canada. I'm joined by my colleague Helda Renian and Danielle Savard, our lead presenter for today on creating affordable communities and housing. Our agenda is as follows. Now that we've passed through some welcomes, we'll be passing it along to Danielle Savard to introduce the topic, followed by some Q&A. For those of you who don't know us, Quest Canada is a national not-for-profit organization that works collectively to advance communities on their path to net zero. We do this through a variety of things, including developing resources, tools, publications, delivering national and regional projects and research. And without further ado, I'd like to pass it now to Danielle Savard to take it away.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen, okay. You see it?
It's good.
Okay, it's good. Okay, good afternoon. You're at your lunchtime probably if you're in the Maritimes, and I would like for you to understand that my goal with the training itself, which is several sessions and also a practical exercise, is going to be for you as decision makers, visionary people, and leaders to become the heroes of the events you have to face in your community. I aim at helping you to adopt the implementation of the energy efficient measures and sustainability principles and concepts for you to be able to implement projects that will respect the environment, that respond to practically all social and energy efficiency issues that your communities have to face. And of course, I would like for you to reach the healthy revenues that will help you to offer sustainable and energy efficient development projects and appropriate services for people who live in your project. Okay, that being said, through the training itself, we're going to focus on one sustainable approach that we believe can help you. It's called sustainable community design. It's not the only sustainable approach that could be used, but this one we know that it works for responding to practically all issues your population may have with developments, including energy efficient measures, integrate projects that will allow you to respond to climate change, offer affordable communities and housing, and increase your revenues with development. Okay, the sessions we have 5 sessions. The first session that was last September, we talked about the framework that we call building sustainable developments by integrating energy efficiency in projects. If you weren't there in September and you would like me to watch that presentation, we have the recording that Quest has it available somewhere. Probably mean
yes, we sent it out. I'll put the link to the recording in the chat here.
Thank you. Thank you. The second one, of course, it's this one, creating affordable communities, and we're going to talk also affordable housing. The third one that is going to be in November, it's going to be on integrating gray and green infrastructure. And in November, we're going to talk about protecting the natural environment and provide the best return on your investments in January. And in February, we're going to take all that information that we were providing up to that point, and we're going to make it a practical exercise for you guys to be able, for you folks to be able to bring all of that together and to be able to implement it in your community. We call it in the workshop. It's going to be a 3-hour presentation by you and by us. Okay, that being said, you're going to say, okay, for those of you that know me, well, I'm president of my own company, Deco Design, and I'm also a registered professional planner with the Canadian Institute of Planners. I have business administration degree and also in urban planning. I have 35 years of experience in planning with specialization in sustainability in the private the public and the NGO sectors. And I received from the Gulf of Maine Council the Visionary Award for the implementation of the approach, sustainable community design, that was implemented in a project that we're going to talk about in a moment. That's called the Village en Ruisseau in Dieppe, New Brunswick. And of course, I mean, I'm a senior associate with Quest. Okay, so session 2, imagine that at first in September, we were talking about the framework, the SCD approach framework that we were talking about. Now we're gonna start to bring the pieces of the puzzles. And the first one that we're going to talk about today is gonna be creating affordable communities and at the same time creating affordable housing. The first question that we can ask ourselves, what is an affordable community? And if you look at sustainable communities, if you want to have something that is going to be sustainable, you're going to need to have that community that is going to be affordable. Sustainable communities, of course, I mean, have sustainable developments. And the sustainable development is going to be trying to reach the center of the triple bottom line planning that we call environment building with sustainable principles, social building for all people, economy providing suitable and sustainable economy for all of that bringing together. And we're going to strive to get to that middle. We will never get exactly in that middle, but we're going to try to be as close as possible to sustainability in our community. And of course, energy efficiency is going to be everywhere because energy efficiency is embedded in these principles that we're going to show here. I put here in bracket the sessions. Sessions 3 and 4 are going to provide more information about environment and economy. Session 2 today, we're going to talk about some of the social issues. But because of time, we have to limit what we're going to present here, okay? We're going to talk about approach that brings sustainability. The one that we are promoting through this training, it's called Building Sustainable Communities with Design. It's the approach that is basically integrated planning for the planners. I mean, that they're talking about the technical term, we call it integrated plan. And the idea is, of course, to have a process that includes all the smart growth principles, new urbanism principles, WANI principles, name it. I mean, all these organizations that are trying to provide principles for us to reach sustainability, to reach the level of finance, for example, that is going to be more sustainable. For example, linking density to tax revenue, attracting immigration and investment in our communities because of all the social issues that we are facing. And of course, I mean, we're going to try to have implementation of sustainable developments that are going to fight climate change and have an appropriate response for lowering our greenhouse gas emission. And of course, this includes all the energy efficiency measures that are in the 3 pillars that are described here. Okay. For today, we're going to limit our discussion on understanding development patterns to a certain extent, talking about density, talking about sprawl versus compact, and we're going to talk about some of our ways of life, talking about generation, social issues, transportation, housing, and all of that inside integration. As you can imagine, I'm just to go at the highest level that we can go and having information just to guide us, but there are way more information that gets inside of that, but we don't have time to talk about that in this session. Okay, now, when we talk about development patterns, we're going to look at conventional layout of subdivisions. And what we notice Residential developments, if we talk about that, well, it's subject, the subdivision itself, it's going to be subject to legislation, regulations that may encourage sprawl. Very often, the goal is administrative with organizations or with communities. There are very few incentives to innovate and protect the natural land. You see unaffordable housing very often. Even if you have more land that is available, doesn't mean that it's going to be more affordable in your community, what research has shown. And all land is divided. There's no efficiency measure, energy efficiency measure that are promoted or considered. And the only open space that is left is basically the undevelopable land. So usually what you're going to experience with subdivisions is going to be the natural areas that have been cleared, graded, and planted with non-native shrubs and trees. I've heard people saying bombing the site, okay? People live on lawns and asphalt and they feel like it, and there's really minimal opportunities for community life at that point. So what are the deficiencies really with conventional layout? Research have shown again that there's no sidewalks nor trails, no open meadows for wildlife or playing fields, little protection from streams, for streams or natural areas. There's a loss of social opportunities, and people depend more on vehicles, and energy efficiency is really not part of the equation at this point in time. And we should always ask the question, but why is it like that? And it's interesting that if we look at the conventional layout, there are 4 major flaws with that have been noted by a lot of people in planning and in the field. Local bylaws, for example, fail to require detailed surveys or inventories. And the Planning Advisory Committee or the commissioners are not required to walk the land. So they always talk about a 2-dimension type of plan for really a 3-dimension type of seeing a site itself. Many bylaws require expensive design drawings when it's not necessary at the preliminary plan stage. We should have more like sketches at that point to figure out where we're going to go with that and how we can implement something that makes sense for the builder and also for the municipality. And the layouts of no expertise in landscape architecture most of the time or neighborhood design. Some people have said they have characterized that by planning by the pipes. Where the pipes goes, it's where planning goes, okay? So you're gonna say, wow, so what? Well, we should probably consider smarter layouts because it's becoming more and more a problem. And interestingly, literature is telling us that layouts are smarter, have higher density and better design. So we're going to talk about design. We're going to talk about the difference between a gross density versus a net density. We're going to talk about area to develop, conservation, and design, how it fits all together. And here we're going to start with what is density. What we have very often in zoning, we have the lot density, and we call it, the net density. And there's a difference, a big difference between net density versus gross density. And here in New Brunswick, for small communities, and these numbers are true numbers from some of small communities in New Brunswick, the zoning bylaw is talking about, for example, 5.8 houses per acre for a lot, okay? So imagine that you have a 40-acre property to develop. Of course, I mean, you're going to think, okay, the number of houses should be 232, 4.8 houses per acre, 40 acres, 232. But the reality is not like that. And you know that because you're in planning and you work in planning to a certain extent, and you have seen that and experienced that. And we should ask ourselves, what is really the reality? What is the built, the conventional way? And in some of these small communities, the reality is going to be 0.66 houses or house per acre, not 5.8 house per acre. And we should ask ourselves, why is it that when it's built, there's only 0.66 house per acre that is built? We have to understand that gross density is the area that fits with the built area. And this is a picture of a small community up north in New Brunswick. And they have 10,730 acres for the built area, and they have only 7,100 residences on that. That represents roughly 1.5 acre per house, because these houses, they need services, they need infrastructure, they need a lot of land that is going to fit also with the setbacks and everything that is written in the zoning bylaw. So the reality for the 40 acres is going to be only 27 houses. So we're talking about that and we're thinking, okay, we have 40 acres. My municipality in reality is talking about 0.66 house per acre. And if we considered only the environmental constraints, that would be the floodplain, could be the wetlands, could be basically the unbuildable areas of our property we want to subdivide. We're going to use here a percentage that was used by the project at Le Village en Haut du Ruisseau in Dieppe, where 35% of the property was considered environmental constraints, and you don't build on that. So we're going to say on our 40 acres here, it's an example, just like that, 40 acres, 35% represents 14 acres. Okay, that means on 26 acres, that means 65% of the property, we're going to build 27 houses. Okay, this is the conventional way of doing it. Now, if we go with another density, and the density that was used at Le Village en Haut du Ruisseau in Dieppe in New Brunswick, well, the density applied to the layout is going to be 6.8 houses per acre on 40 acres. And on this property that we were talking about at Le Village en Haut du Ruisseau, we're talking about 30 acres. And on the 30 acres, when you took the environmental constraints, floodplains, wetlands, and all that type of land, and you add to that the important features biologically important or culturally important or historically important, and you add that to the environmental constraints, it represents about 76% of that property at Le Village en Haut du Ruisseau. So we're going to use the same percentages here to compare apples with apples, okay? So 76% of 40 acres is roughly 30 acres here. So it means we're going to build on 10 acres, not on 26, but on 10 acres. Now, 6.8 houses per acre on 40 acres, it represents 272 houses. And here it's interesting, 10 times more units or houses have been built there compared to a conventional way of doing it. Or putting it another way, it takes 375 more acres of land to build the same number of units that would be built with the density like Le Village-en-Haut-du-Ruisseau type of density that would be applied to that 40 acres. And of course, I mean, energy efficiency, you can see it right away. It makes sense to have more density. Okay, that being said, we're going to shift now about sprawl and compact and the characteristic of sprawl. Sprawl has been seen in a lot of literature as less energy efficient way of building, simply because, I mean, there's more space per person, of course, more expensive to build because there's more roads, pipes, sewers, infrastructure per resident, costs more to maintain and protect with emergency services, pollute more, and of course, as you can imagine, missed opportunities for energy efficiency, district energy, thermal networks, and clean energy integration. Okay. Now, when we look at sprawl lifestyle that we see everywhere, the typical suburban lifestyle, research has shown that it requires 31 acres of prime productive land, farms, mines, fields, and forests to meet just one family needs. So you bet me that there's going to be a lot of space just for one family. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that we have to consider another way of doing it, which is going to be compact. We're going to try, I mean, as much as possible to be compact. And if you talk about compact, the first thing that is going to come to you is VKT, or vehicle kilometers traveled. If you reduce it when you're going to mix jobs and household density altogether, you're going to have the location of your subdivision that is going to be closer to community center and services. You're going to have mixed uses, internal design that is going to fit with that, and connection to existing street network and access to transit. Suddenly we can see that we can have something like that, but it means the density will be higher. And research has shown that if you increase your density by 2 times compared to what you have in conventional way of building, you can lower VKT by 25%. It's what you're trying to do here. So of course, compact is going to be more energy efficient. Now, another important aspect to consider, it's going to be our ways of life. And we're going to focus on certain elements here. One of the most important one is going to be understanding the generations. And if I ask you the question, who is leading the trend right now? Is it the silent generation, the baby boomers, or Generation X? And a lot of people, if I ask them the question, they're going to say the boomers, because it seems that the boomers are the ones, I mean, that have created a lot of problem for people in the society sometimes, and they feel like should be the boomers. Or I hear something like that, the municipalities, the builders, the developers. But how about that? Generation Y and Generation Z. And who are these people? Well, Generation Y is similar to Generation Z. They have a way of thinking that is different than their parents, but sometimes they may think like their parents. For example, the boomers for Generation Z. For the Generation Y, the Generation Z, they may think like Generation Y, and sometimes they may think like their parents, which were Generation X, okay? And why is it important? It's because these people will have a way of approaching our subdivision building that is going to represent what they want, okay? One of the things that is extremely important for all of them is going to be affordable housing. And here I'm going to tell you a story that relates to 2021 that relates to affordable housing as being an issue. The first thing that we have to consider, of course, is going to be the pandemic. Okay, what did create the pandemic? Well, CMHC was telling us that buying a house becomes unaffordable, and what also have happened, there have been a deterioration in affordability during the pandemic to a point where you've seen across Canada at least 65% increase in the assessment of houses between 2002 and to 2021. Okay, 2021. A lot of people were thinking, okay, maybe rental is going to be more affordable because the government is going to protect it. But CMHC was saying, well, think twice. The vaccine will lead to higher immigration and return to the office for downtown workers and in-class learning for post-secondary students. Well, it's what they were saying. And eventually higher rentals too. And the question is going to be, are we ready to face that demand? Now, another way also of taking care of or having that in mind is the living space. And research has shown that 50% of our jobs will be taken over by AI and automation within the next 15 years. That was a study done in 2018. But what does it mean for our home living space? In 2010, there was a study that was done about what was done in 1990 and how much space people were living in their house and how much square footage they needed. And what we have seen since 1990, Canadians have bigger homes and fewer people living in them, and more stuff that requires energy, to the extent of a 44% increase in living space between 1990 and 2017. The average home size in Canada is roughly around 1,800 square footage, and the average living area per person is around 620 square footage, which, by the way, is the third largest in the world. The first one is Australia, and the second one is the American. Okay, now, when we talk about our ways of life, and we talk about subdivision, we talk also about the destruction of the natural area or the green space. And that created a situation where we have seen at the same time increase in vandalism, increase in crimes. We try to segregate the land use activities. For example, residential is going to be in one area, commercial in another area, industrial in another area, and just go on like that. Okay. We have seen also obesity going through the roof, if we could say, because a lot of people now rely on their car to go from point A to point B, and social isolation, the community design, isolate generations. And this information comes from Penn studies, where they said contemporary society shunts away seniors. Okay, now, the costs with our ways of life, if we look at it, we were striving to, and we're still striving to have a big house. We overspend. We created also a situation where we need a lot of space for our cars, because I mean, we want to make sure that we have enough space for snow, enough space for this, enough space for that. So we have wide streets. We have also created a situation where the commercial area is big box retail store. So you need your car to go from point A to point B. And of course, living in New Brunswick or living in a rural area, you don't need a small car, you need a big car, because I mean, sometimes we have a lot of snow in this area and the roads are not 100% perfect all the time. Okay, so what we are trying to do, we're trying to facilitate that way of life. So we offer a lot of land that is available and the density is very low. We make sure that the zoning regulation or zoning bylaw is going to facilitate that way of life. And because we travel from back and forth between point A and point B for services, for work, for whatever, the food industry is trying to supposedly help us, and they offer fast food. And we created here a huge bunch of problems. First of all, I mean, we're starting to see a lot of traffic on the road. Suddenly, the house prices, should I say, is extremely high. Greenhouse gas emission and climate change are a big issue. Life insurance, car insurance, name it, I mean, whatever type of insurance is increasing every year. We've seen vandalism increasing, crime increasing, social isolation experienced by a lot of communities. And we have seen a lot of natural space disappearing. And there's a direct link with our kids being sick. And because, I mean, we are hardly moving in society in general, well, excuse me the pun here, the big problem is obesity. And also with that, the fact that the diabetes, type 2 diabetes is also a huge issue in our community. So we say, okay, is there a way that we can deal with that? Is it possible, I mean, to have design that is going to help us? Well, why not, I mean, to think about that? If we are going to have a good design, something that is going to be sustainable, right away, research have shown that it's improving social connection. It's going also to facilitate neighborhoods that are going to be more walkable, and suddenly you're going to have people with less diabetes, type 2 diabetes in your community, and availability of good food through urban agriculture or community gardens that are integrated with your subdivision is going to lower obesity. And greening urban space and other measures to improve neighborhoods can reduce violence, lead to safer and healthier communities, which of course is going to benefit us all. Research have shown that. And research has shown also that people's life satisfaction improved when they moved to greener urban areas and decreased in urban spots where nature was out of sight. So if you want me to see vandalism going down, have more trees in your area. Another thing also that is extremely interesting here, it comes from University of Pennsylvania, where they said that mixing residential only zoning into commercial blocks may reduce crime. And they have shown through their research how it has an impact. Now, when we talk about all that, we said, okay, now, of course, I mean, there's something to do with transportation. And here, transportation is a huge subject. We're going to be just at the beginning of talking about travel and commuting. Greenhouse gas emission, if you look at it with transportation in Canada, is roughly 25% that have been created by transportation. And also studies have shown that land use activities such as residential, industrial, institutional, commercial creates another 25% roughly of greenhouse gas emission. But they never talk about design and how design can alleviate or can reduce greenhouse gas emission. You just give the numbers, okay? Now, interestingly, if you put the two together, land use activities plus transportation, roughly we're going to see 50%. But here we're going to start to think about design, because think about that. Average North American family leaves home 13 times per day to go to work, school, shop, services, other. Studies have been done on that for many years and have shown that. Now, interestingly, if we look at the purpose of all these trips, roughly you could say 80% is for something else than work-related, and 20% work-related. And the design, how you're going to have your subdivision being done, is going to have quite an impact. They even mentioned something interesting: better job accessibility significantly decreases the duration of joblessness among lower paid workers. And that is interesting also to consider. Now, travel and commuting, of course, if you ask the government where they're going to put the emphasis, and you have seen that over and over again, they're going to put the emphasis on carbon content for fuel and vehicle efficiency. But imagine that it's a three-legged stool. So two of the legs would be carbon content and vehicle efficiency. But if we really want to decrease greenhouse gas emission, we will have to talk about the design. That means lower the VKT, or vehicle kilometers travel. That means we're going to have to put a lot of emphasis on compact and mixed use developments in our subdivision building. Affordable housing is also a very big issue these days. Who are we talking about here? If we ask ourselves the question, the four type of professions that are crucial to have in your communities are going to be the policemen, the nurses, the people in education, and also the farm people, farming and farm person people that are going to be in your community. These people are not rich, but they have a certain salary. And CMHC is telling us that we should never spend more than 30% of our income for shelter. And by the way, in 2019 in New Brunswick, it was 24% that people were spending on average, okay? But it has increased to another level these days, okay? But that was before the pandemic. Now, cars represent roughly in Canada about 25% of the family budget, or if you use the transit system, it's going to be 9% of your budget. And interestingly, they're saying for low-income individuals, owning and operating a car is a disproportionate family burden that can consume up to 40% of a family budget. Public transit provides a more affordable options, obviously. Now, if we summarize this way of thinking, we can see that we shouldn't spend more than 30% for our shelter, and 10% is what CMHC is telling us also, not more than 10% for transportation. So altogether, it represents 40%. Okay, now, if we take an example of a real example, the median household income in New Brunswick in 2021 was roughly around 53,000, minus 10% for, I'm going to say transportation, we take transit, okay? So it means that you're left with 47,000 in your pocket. Well, 30% of 47,000, it's going to be roughly around $1,200 per month. That represents a maximum that you can have at the bank for a mortgage of $200,000 at the rate of 7.25%, 5% of stress test plus 2.25% that it was last time when I look at that, that was in August or September, okay? Now, that is for 25 years with a down payment of 5%. Now, interestingly, we have to compare it to how much it costs to have to pay for a house. The average price of a home sold in New Brunswick in May 2022 was $316,000. Common sense tells us, okay, we cannot afford, okay? Now, is there a way of dealing with that and working with that? Okay, 200,000 is what I can get from the bank. Now, I have my car, so it means that not more than $200,000. But if I use other mode of transportation, the Pembina Institute did a study in 2012 where they said that for each vehicle removed from a household budget, it corresponds to $200,000 more that can be carried on a 25-year mortgage. So 200 plus 200 means 400,000 compared to 316,000 that was the average price of a home in New Brunswick. Well, you can see here we can afford. However, we have to understand we're going to need to put a lot of emphasis on design of our communities and our subdivision. And we have to look at the tool for creating affordable housing. Here, I just look at an information that came in 2021 that was promoted by CMHC that is very interesting. It's tools for creating affordable housing, policy and planning related tools, government programs and initiatives, or public-private partnership or financial type of tools. We should look at our design for our communities and use the appropriate tool. And if you want to have more information about that, because I'm just looking at the time, I don't have a lot of time in front of me, please go back to that information from CMHC. And if you have time, also to look at that PDF document from inclusion of affordable housing in new transit-oriented developments in Canadian cities. Okay, now we're going to try to integrate all these design elements and principles into a step-by-step process. And we're going to use the example, of course, of Le Village en Haut des Ruisseaux, as I mentioned to you, where we have used the sustainable community design process, including, of course, energy efficiency elements. And here it is. It's all the elements here that deals with preconditions that should be there first. What are the steps and design elements that should be considered? How can we deal with the legal aspect of it? How to put also in place the infrastructure? How can we benefit and have the profits that are going to be generated with the subdivision, and looking at the restoration of biodiversity and facilitating also the implementation. Okay, that being said, we now can see that the context of our community is extremely important. The capacity of doing it using a sustainable approach is going to be also very important, and having a project can make it a reality in our community. And we should think about creating these type of project over and over in all the communities. And I would say, please start with one project at the beginning, not two or three, just one. And after that, when you've seen how it works, go ahead. Okay, I'm going to stop here just to tell you that session 3, we're going to talk about integrating gray and green infrastructure. It's going to be on November 8th. Of course, I mean, I want to hear your questions, and I want to give us a bit of time for discussion. And if you're interested to pursue with the SAD approach, feel free just to get in touch with me. It's going to be my pleasure to work with you and to see how we can implement it in your community. On that, thank you very much. And Eddie, it's gonna be, the screen is gonna be yours.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Danielle. Thank you very much for the second session. I just want to let everyone know we will share the PDF version of this presentation and the recording if you need to go back on it. So at this stage, I'd like to open the floor. If there's anybody that has a burning question for Danielle, now is the time. You can also put it in the chat if that's better for you.
Oh, you said in the chat.
Yeah, it could either be the
chat. Oh, you're going to read it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Okay.
Or somebody can just unmute. And if you have any questions or feedback for Danielle. The process that you outlined with the integration of all these principles into a development project. Do you have some kind of an outline, like a 1 or 2 pager that explains those steps?
The steps itself, the pager that we're talking completely at the end with the integration. Yes, I have, something like that. I go, through a kind of training or bring the community with me, helping them to understand each of the steps. There's the two-pager that I can give to communities. It's that page plus also information that relates to that. Yes, it's possible to do that. Yes, and feel free. Just spread the news, explaining to people there's ways of improving our communities, and there's ways to have it more sustainable if we take the right approach.
Would there be a starting point if you were to go to a new community? What would you suggest is the first thing they should do once they've identified a project or a site that looks as a prospect?
Okay, I'm going to say, you remember in the first session, we were thinking of, we were talking about 3 elements that should be absolutely there if you're interested to have a project on board for your community. And the first one is going to be, of course, a builder and the community or the municipality that are interested to build what we call a community project, because it's not really only a builder project, it's really a community project. The second one is having the capacity. That means following the step-by-step process that are extremely important. One step should be before another one, and the steps that is after shouldn't be at the beginning, something like that. And at the same time, finding the funding. If you don't have the funding and you cannot bring the project to fruition, well, it's going to be, some people said pie in the sky, but in our case, we know it works. And if people are interested in the community, the first thing that we're going to do is sit down with the decision makers in that community and say, okay, where do you want to go? Because we're going to start where the community is, and we're going to move on where they want to go and what they would like to reach. Whatever they would like to reach as a community in sustainability, it's possible to do it.
I have a question here from Jennifer Jarvis. How do you convince the consumer that smaller homes and more condensed living is the future, no longer the Canadian dream of single-family home ownership?
Interesting questions, because it's not, it's what conservation in the States, they call it conservation subdivision, okay? That type of approach that I'm talking about, but not to the same extent that we're going here in Canada. But in the States, when they put a lot of emphasis on conservation subdivision, what they notice, the living space for a house in a conservation subdivision is not smaller than the living space of a house in a conventional project in the same area. So basically, you can do it with bigger house, or you can do it with smaller house. You can even go with, it's what Marcel Lebrun that has these tiny homes here in close by where I live, where you should see, it's really small. It's for a certain segment of the market, but you identify which segments you want. It's interesting. When I was looking at the information from that document I was referring, that is inclusion of affordable housing in new transit-oriented development in Canadian cities, they were talking about single family, small lot, single family housing, laneway houses, garage conversion, townhouses, low rise, 2 to 6 story apartments, micro apartments, additional floors, residential over commercial, industrial or commercial building conversion, housing developed on underused parking lots. It basically, you identify where the market would be, what type of want is expressed in your community, and you try to reach it, or you bring the type of living space that fits with where people want to go.
Okay, so if I was to sort of summarize as well, through conservation design, you are not only protecting ecologically significant or otherwise significant land, you're building to standards that Canadians are familiar with. That could be single family use, it could be split, it could be multi-unit residential, or even tiny homes, but it's essentially addressing the affordability and the social requirements of your community in a more direct fashion.
Yeah, just to give you the example of Le Village en Haut-du-Ruisseau, for those of you that are going to visit that area, you're going to see there's houses, single family dwelling houses, big houses that are detached over there. There are duplexes, sixplexes, they have apartment buildings. It's a mix of different type of units depending on the market. And I remember when I was talking to Charles Poirier, the builder, and he was telling me, oh, what type of housing can I build there? I said, well, it depends what you have in mind as a market you want to fill. Because he was surprised. And I said, we're working with you. You know the market way better than I would know personally. But also we have to consider affordable housing. And we made sure that 20% of the units over there are going to be affordable as defined by the municipality, not by the builder. But he was really happy with how it unraveled. And I'm going to talk about that even more on the next session, and especially the one in January.
I have a question from Marcus. How can municipalities encourage landlords not to include parking in the rent? Tenants should be enabled to pay separately for any parking they need.
Amen. I would say to this municipality, well, some communities, not only in Canada, but well, quite a lot in the States, they're starting now to say no minimum parking required. It depends what is your market. And you can have a subdivision with no minimum parking that are required at all. And you can say, oh, we can justify because it's all close to services. For example, lifestyle centers. We're going to talk about that in the other session, okay? Lifestyle centers are where people say, I don't need a car. I can have car sharing, or I can have other modes of transportation, and I don't need a car. So why should I have to pay for a parking lot or a parking stall that is expensive to build and also expensive to maintain and takes a lot of space?
Harpal Singh also asks, if more residential density and mixed-use residential development are better for a community, what are the current barriers in increasing the density from, let's say, 5.8 houses to 8 houses per acre, and to make more affordable housing per lot? What are the current barriers?
One of the obvious problem is zoning.
Mm-hmm.
The conventional zoning is going to be for the minimum to respect. You remember session 1, we were saying, okay, zoning is for the minimum to respect, to destroy the least amount of the natural environment as you're going to build, okay? But it never promotes sustainability. And if you want to have a sustainability point where it's going to really improve the situation of your community, you will need to have other tools than only the zoning bylaw. And one of the tools, for example, here in New Brunswick, And there are also not only New Brunswick, but it could be in all the provinces of the Maritimes, and even in Quebec and Ontario, they're talking about that. You can use your secondary plan, or you can use a development scheme. And it's very interesting because I'm going to talk about that, especially in January. I'm going to talk about the fact that a development scheme is between your municipal plan and your zoning provisions. And what it means that your project can be in the middle, and you can supersede all the zoning provisions that normally you would have with a conventional project. You adopt the project itself, and the project itself is built around sustainability, and it's going to be adopted as such.
Okay, thank you very much, Danielle, for the answer to that. We're now getting close to the hour. While we close out here, I'd like to launch an evaluation poll. If you could take a minute to answer the 3 or 4 questions there. We would really appreciate your feedback on this particular session. Danielle, in one final thought, if you may, you are probably aware of the municipal reform taking place and the opportunity that that presents going forward for the updating of municipal plans, including potentially land use plans and bylaws. What would you suggest be, something that municipalities should have on their radar when they're going through that process? Is there anything quick hitters that they can incorporate in their municipal plans or policies to encourage sustainable or conservation design?
Yeah, one of the things that I would say, why not to put it right in your statements, in your municipal plan or rural plan, that you're going to facilitate sustainable community design, or you're going to facilitate the implementation of subdivisions that are going to be with sustainable principles, and it's going to be possible to adopt a development scheme, or you're going to have a secondary plan that is possible for these areas. And if you're doing something like that, you're taking the right approach right from the get-go. It's not impossible, even, if you have a plan that is not facilitating to do it, it simply means that we have to take some steps back in order, to bring sustainability with the plan. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Very much appreciate everyone's time today. Look forward to receiving you on our next session. You'll receive an email or calendar invite from my colleague Hal Darenian for our session in November. And thanks again, Danielle, for your presentation today.
Thank you. I would like to thank everybody